Mark Rylance and Tom Hardy star in Christopher Nolan's war epic Dunkirk. Dane DeHaan plays the intergalactic hero in Luc Besson's sci-fi epic Valerian, and Charlize Theron is kicking butt in 1980s Berlin in Atomic Blonde. That's all on this edition of Movies with Mark. Hi, I'm Mark McPherson, movie critic for Moviespoon.com, and today I'm going to be taking a look at 3 movies that are currently playing in theaters right now. Well, our first film is Christopher Nolan's war epic Dunkirk, and at first I thought, okay, well, it's Christopher Nolan, he's going to make a grand-looking war film about the British soldiers just trying to leave Dunkirk and trying to get out of there as soon as possible. But he does away with a lot of the extra baggage we see in a lot of war films with establishing character. Here, Nolan bypasses that entirely by not even really setting up these characters with backstories that we've seen before, or sob stories that we've heard before. The same thing of like, oh, I got a girl back home, I got to get home so quickly, or there's somebody playing a harmonica in the background. It's like, oh, I'm one day away from retirement, or any of that, that typical stuff. So Christopher Nolan keeps this film squarely focused on 3 different stories. One is the story on the beach, where a bunch of soldiers are trying to leave, and we follow a few of them that try to stow away, try to swim for it, try to get on a boat, try to make their way out of here in this impossible to leave situation where there are too many soldiers. There's not enough boats to take them out, and the boats that are getting out are getting blown out of the water, and there's nothing they can do, and they're struggling to get out. And meanwhile, in the air, Tom Hardy is trying to provide air support by taking down these bombers that are just pummeling this beach and the boats that are trying to leave it. And again, like, it's squarely focused. Like, there isn't a lot of scenes where Tom Hardy gets to, emote or make some emotional speech here. He's squarely focused on the mission at hand. And yeah, people are going to die along the way, and you might die along the way, and your instruments might give out, and you could be just a few seconds away from death. And it's like, you don't have time for sub-arc saying like, oh, tell my wife I love her, or I was so close. It's like, no, you don't have time for that. You have a mission to do. And then by sea, we see Mark Rylance as a captain of a yacht. And he's trying to get to Dunkirk to try to help out. He's not in the military, but he's trying to help out as much as he can by, bringing his boat over there and taking out as many soldiers as he can. I really like Mark Rylance's story in this. I mean, he doesn't, like I said, nobody really has much of any backstory or character here. But Mark Rylance's character is actually pretty cool because, even though he's a yacht captain, he has a little bit of smarts where it comes to dealing with the war, where it's like, oh, we got to save these people on this boat. It's like, yeah, but we don't want to get too close, or we could get bombed, or we can't get too close to, all these soldiers that are in this boat that's leaking gasoline into the water, because like then our boat could be set aflame. We have to be smart about this. We don't know a lot about these characters. There isn't a lot of dialogue with these characters. And I like that because I honestly, like, Nolan's a great director for staging these like amazing action sequences and thrilling scenes of great visual effects. But I don't think he's the best with character. And I think he realizes that here too, because he wants to make a war film very much about the war and not sort of like the side melodramatic elements that he could have added in. He's mostly just showcasing just how horrific it would be to be on this beach, or be in a boat trying to save soldiers, or be in the air knowing that you are moments away from being blown out of the sky. He keeps us there. It's very much an in-the-moment type film. You feel very intense throughout this film. And I think it's mostly has to do with the fact that that this is Christopher Nolan's shortest film. It almost feels like, he was playing editor on this, where he was making this film where he did have these characters with backstories, and they had a lot of dialogue, and they were talking about, how they can see home right from the beach, and they can't get there. He could have whipped up some dramatic story, some melodramatic story from that, but he doesn't. It almost feels like he's playing editor here, as though he had a 2.5-hour epic, and then just kind of looked at it and said, okay, which parts do I want to keep? Like, what are the key points that I want people to take away from this? And he edited, and if he was editing it that way, he did a very good job, because he keeps us looking where all the soldiers are looking and hearing what all the soldiers are hearing. The soundtrack on this thing, just the sound mixing is amazing. Just the sounds of the bombers coming overhead. I've never been in a theater where I felt, you know, where you actually feel like, you know, like the bombers might be coming overhead, because they're so ear-piercingly loud and they're shaking the theater so much that you're just like, oh my goodness, this seems like the worst place to be. I've compared Christopher Nolan as kind of the thinking man's Michael Bay, and I think it kind of proves it here because, you know, last month I had to deal with Bay's latest Transformers movie, in which, you know, he has the soundtrack blaring once again, you know, with the explosions and the gunfire and the lasers shooting everywhere, and it was just so damaging to your ears because it's so loud. And here's Dunkirk, a film that's just as loud and just as blaring, but I love it more because, like, with Nolan's whole point is to showcase, look, it would suck to be on the beach, and if bombers were coming overhead, you know, they just wouldn't, it wouldn't sound like, it doesn't like, and then bombs dropping. No, it would sound horribly loud. It's a situation you don't want to be in. My only major hang-up with the film, and I know that a lot of people are probably going to have this hang-up as well, is that for showcasing so much action and intensity in a war film, there's not really a lot of blood, or there's not really a lot of like blood or gore, especially, you know, if you compare it like to last year's like Hacksaw Ridge, you know, which showcased war as being, you know, bloody and vicious and horrific and limbs flying and just blood coming out of wounds and people getting shot left and right. Dunkirk feels a little bit more sanitized in that we don't really see much of any blood. Mostly just, you know, from like aftermath wounds and stuff like that. And we really don't see any, like, you know, limbs flying off. And for a lot of people, this is going to be like a big argument about, you know, is that appropriate or not? But I think it helps to kind of, because it seems like Nolan is focusing more on the situation rather than the graphic nature of war. It feels like Christopher Nolan has seen a bunch of war films and he knows, you know, what we already know, what we've seen before, and tries to place stuff up on the screen that, you know, that we haven't seen before and that we haven't felt before. And that's what I think is so great about Dunkirk, is that it gives us that experience of, you know, how horrific it was on the beach, rather than just showing us the same things that we've seen before, you know, with like Saving Private Ryan, you know, where we have a very gory scene on the beach and then, you know, lots of characters talking about how they just want to get home. We know most of those stories. So here, it almost feels like kind of like Nolan's doing like kind of a, you know, like they do those Civil War reenactments. Dunkirk feels like it's trying to be that. And it's intense, and it leaves an impression on you when you leave the theater. So yeah, I really dug the film. I would have liked just a little bit of character, just so that we could follow just a little bit of the arcs going on here, especially because I really liked Mark Rylance's character. Tom Hardy was all right. Cillian Murphy. I don't think anyone is given like a solid name. They might mention their name once or twice, but most of them don't. And you don't really learn their names throughout. Especially Cillian Murphy, who plays, I think his credit was just like Shivering Soldier. And yet he's such a great character because he portrays, you know, how much he wants to leave Dunkirk. And then when he's picked up by Mark Rylance's character, he's like, I can't go back there. We can't go back there. And you understand why. Dunkirk, it is one heck of an experience. It is unlike any war film I've ever seen. It's surprisingly subtle for Christopher Nolan, despite, you know, being very loud and blaring and having lots of visual effects here. I think it gets across its message very well, in a way that no other war film could. This doesn't just feel like it's Christopher Nolan's war film. It feels like a very personal masterpiece of Christopher Nolan, and unlike any of his other work that I've seen, and that I would expect from him. You know, this is a genuine surprise from Christopher Nolan. So for that, I'm going to give Dunkirk 3.5 stars. Our next film is Valerian and the City of 1,000 Planets, and it's written and directed by Luc Besson of The Fifth Element. And wow, this is a dazzling film to look at. It's got great visual effects. It's got these alien settings and all sorts of different alien creatures and tech and spaceships and different costumes and just all of these great elements of this giant alien world and galaxy. And yet, its characters suck. So our heroes of the picture are Valerian and Nolan, and they're intergalactic couple slash co-workers that they're boyfriend and girlfriend, but they work together in the field, and you know they're debating about getting married. And that could be a cool element, except Besson really doesn't know how to write or direct these actors of Dane DeHaan and Cara Delevingne, I think. You know, she played the Enchantress in Suicide Squad. They really don't have any chemistry here. I mean, the film tries to set up Valerian as this sort of lady killer, but in order to make this come across, it involves his love interest of Lorraine actually saying, "Oh, you're such a lady killer." It's like, no, that's not quite how that works, especially since both Dane DeHaan and Cara Delevingne, they're so underacting here. They feel like, you know, they're not really a couple, you know, they don't really have much charisma, they barely smile at each other, and they barely seem amazed by this incredible world that's developed around, like, these aliens and this space station and all these different species, and they seem bored. This is the number one thing I hate in these big sci-fi epics where we have like all these vast locations and creatures and visual effects and starships. We have all this cool stuff, and the characters occupying it look like they've seen it all before and they looked bored. And that ruins the film for me because, you know, you want to feel the excitement going on in this film, and when you're following along with heroes who aren't that impressed by anything, it's like, well, why should we be impressed by any of this? Because we should. I mean, the visual effects here, the world that Besson's created, it's amazing to look at, especially in the first scene, where we're introduced to this alien culture of these basically these tall-looking aliens that are bald and they have glittery skin, and they harvest these special pearls that give them energy, and they feed the pearls to these little creatures, and then they end up pooping out more pearls. It's very cool to see that in a sci-fi film where they put a lot of effort into, you know, finding out about the central alien race here. Now, the central plot involves the glittery alien race. Their homeworld has been assaulted by some starships, and their race has kind of been a mystery because now they're living within the shadows. But now they're trying to infiltrate the International Space Station, which I forgot to mention that. The movie begins with the International Space Station basically growing and expanding. You know, we get aliens come to Earth, and then we end up making it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where it has to get away from Earth, and that becomes the city of 1,000 planets. Because essentially the space station becomes its own little world, which has these little sections for each alien race, and they all work together, and they all have lots of different technology, and it's really cool to see. But this glittery race of aliens are kind of like off to the side, thinking that, oh, you know, we've been betrayed by an organization here, and we don't know who it is, but we're trying to figure it out and rebuild our race. And at the same time, Clive Owen, who's playing a human commander, is trying to cover it up because he might have something to do with it. And we're basically trying to follow along with Valerian and Lorraine and trying to uncover this mystery. And it sounds like a cool plot, and it is, except for the fact that the actors in it suck. And that's the sad truth, is that the actors really don't feel as engaged with this film, especially for a film that has a lot going for it. I love the different visual effects here. I love at one point they go hunting for jellyfish in the back of these giant whales, and I love the fact that when there's a starship trying to make an escape, it ends up exploding into a whole bunch of different tiny starships to try to confuse you about which direction to go. There's an amazing sequence in the beginning of the very first mission of Valerian, where he is infiltrating this virtual reality market of sorts, where you put on these little goggles and these special gloves, and you can interact with another dimension in the desert. And he goes in there with the intent of stealing something from this gangster alien. And it's such a cool concept, especially, you know, they have this little box that you can, you know, put your hand in and it goes through the other dimension. And he's basically running around with, like, his hand in the dimension, pointing guns at people and stealing stuff out of there. And it's a really cool concept. And I wish the characters worked here. I wish that they had some charisma and energy to them. Especially when, like, there's a scene where Valerian witnesses this shape-shifting alien perform, like, this kind of, like, stage act or striptease or erotic show for him. And it's such an amazing sight. And yet his reaction the whole time is just... it's just blank. It's like, okay, maybe he's in awe, but he spends the whole film just being so catatonic. He can't really tell if he's impressed by anything at that point. Especially when, I mean, come on, he's sharing this scene with Ethan Hawke dressed up as this like neon-dressed pimp who's overacting it, who's hamming it up as much as possible. I mean, and he has to because the Han's doing nothing, and Ethan Hawke is just going nuts, going like, "Hey, check this out! Isn't it amazing?" It's like, yeah, it is amazing. Why isn't Valerian digging on it as well? There's a lot that I like about this film, but it more has to do with certain scenes than it does with the characters. I mean, there's another great detour where Valerian has to rescue Nolan from these weird aliens with like eyes on the top of their head, and that they're a little bit stupid and a little bit gluttonous. And he has to fight them off with swords, and they have amazing expressions and hilarious reactions. It's a fun little detour. There are a whole bunch of little mini movies within this film that are really cool. That would be fun to explore on their own as their own film. And that's the other problem too, is that I think Besson loads this film up with so much detail with like the species and just the whole sci-fi setting. That it basically overloads you to the point that when we get to the third act where he starts slowing down and focusing the story, you just feel a little winded because there's so many sci-fi elements here that are so cool, and we breeze by them pretty quickly. Not as quickly where, you know, we don't get to see any of it. But it did get to a point where I was kind of like, wait, back up. I want to see what was happening there with those robots who were assembling this huge server city or whatever, and what was happening with these creatures who were harvesting cells that could cure disease or something like that. What's happening over there? What's happening here? What is this alien race doing here? There's some alien swindlers who try to give people information as this kind of like ridiculous trio. Who have, it's surprising that, you know, there's a lot of CGI characters here who have more emotion on their face than the two leads. Everyone seems to have so much fun in this film except for our romantic couple, who seem like, you know, they're like an older romantic couple who, you know, have grown tired of each other and tired of this world, and it's just like, but this world's so cool! Why wouldn't you be impressed by this world? Like, all these different aliens and creatures and technology, and you're just like, another day at the office, you know? Valerian is tough to recommend. I mean, I do like the visuals in it. I think there's a lot of cool sequences here, but the character is just not there. I mean, I compared this film to what Disney did with John Carter, which they put a lot of effort into making a cool sci-fi world, but the actors pulling it along, they just can't do it. And partially I don't blame them as much, mainly because the dialogue that they're given here is not that great. Like, seriously, when we have to develop our characters of Valerian, like I said, most of his traits have to be said rather than shown, and that's really sad, especially for a film that shows us so much depth of its galaxies and all these cool designs, and it doesn't show us much of any character. Which, you know, usually they can skate by, but not so much with this film. So, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, it's a little bit of a tough call here, but I'm going to have to go with 2.5 stars. Our next film is Atomic Blonde, and it stars Charlize Theron as a kick-butt action star of a spy working in 1980s Berlin, and it sounds like such a cool idea for a movie, and it does lead to some cool scenes, but it's too bad that this film really can't decide on a style. The plot here is a fairly convoluted spy thriller. I mean, Theron has to go into Berlin and obtain this watch that has all this information about, you know, secret agents and stuff that could be damaging to England and America, whatever. It's all just an excuse for Theron to go into Berlin and kick as much butt as possible. And she does. She really showcases how much of a badass she is in this film. I mean, she takes baths in bathtubs of ice. She has lots of bruises and cuts on her body. There's an amazing scene where she goes into an apartment building, and the film, I swear, the film turns into The Raid at this point, where she's essentially just killing her way up the stairs, into a room, out of the stairs, down and out of the apartment, into a car, and then there's a car chase going on, and it's staged, you know, kind of like it's all going on in one shot here, which, you know, with some clever editing, obviously it wouldn't all be one shot, but it's still kind of cool to see, you know, that the camera can hold on Theron while she goes through these action scenes where she's shooting at people and stabbing people and punching people and throwing people off staircases and tossing them out windows and smashing them into walls. And these sequences are really cool too, in that we get to see, you know how much, like, they don't establish like Theron in these scenes as being, you know, invincible, you know, like the invincible action star who can effortlessly take out a whole room of guys like it's nothing. No, here we see, especially because the camera holds on Theron, we get to see how much of a toll it takes on her body. Like, she doesn't land every blow, and like the enemy will get in a few good punches or a stab here and there. So that by the time we get to like the very last, you know, one-on-one match in the apartment building, Theron is a mess. Like, she's stumbling around, she can barely move, she's just kind of like swinging at air as she's trying to like get rid of the last bad guy. And it's a really cool scene, and like I said, it feels like it's from The Raid. And there's a lot of scenes like that where it feels like it's trying to be a bunch of different films, but can't really decide on one. It feels like this is a film that's still trying to find its style, because you have these cool sequences of like these neon clubs and these stylized sequences, and then you have like transitions that have these giant helicopter shots and these visual effects that whip us around all over the place, and it tries to force the 80s theme as much as possible. Oh my goodness, the choices for the soundtrack on this film are terrible. It just feels like, they just like switched on the radio of like, you know, playing the greatest hits of the 80s, and it's just kind of like playing in the background there while all the action and stuff is going on in the foreground. Because most of this, yeah, it's like they're all recognizable 80s songs, like to the point where, you know, like I said, it feels like they're playing the greatest hits of the 80s, but not all of them really sync up that well. It feels very much like the director is struggling to try to find something to fit here. Atomic Blonde is a film that I could see a few months from now, someone will just, you know, take clips from it and like they'll put it on YouTube, and people will think it's like the best film ever. Like, I guarantee you, somebody will cut up that long sequence where Theron goes into the apartment building and fights her way up and fights her way out. Somebody will post that on YouTube or something, and somebody will look at that and say like, oh man, this movie's awesome, this looks like an amazing movie. And it's like, yeah, that part of the film's amazing, but then there's a lot of parts that don't work, especially with, you know, revealing like the character twist, which just kind of like mount up and up and up and up to a point where it's just like, okay, I really don't care anymore. It's like, oh, is this character backstabbing that character? Oh yeah, okay, great, sure. But yeah, I think there's bits and pieces to like here, especially with like Theron. I think she's an amazing action star here, and she deserves a film that, you know, that should nail down its tone and its style, because she's such an amazing action star, and she needs to be better utilized in a script that at least knows what it's doing, because it feels like it's trying to be both a stylish spy thriller and also a convoluted spy thriller, and also this sort of like neon haze of a film that kind of feels like Snatch a little bit, and it never really settles on a story or tone. I liked parts of Atomic Blonde. I think there's something to be said of these amazing action sequences, and Theron is obviously an awesome action hero here, but it can't pick out a style, and I think that hurts the film more than anything. And when they can't pick out a style, they just flip on the radio for greatest hits of the 80s, and that doesn't quite work here. So for Atomic Blonde, it's a very tough call, but I'm gonna have to go with 2.5 stars.